besties and bosses. Happy Tuesday. How y'all doing? Those of you in the US, did you have a good holiday yesterday? Yesterday was Memorial Day. I don't know if anyone else is like this. My coach said the same thing, but I realized on Sunday that it was a holiday on Monday because one of my girlfriends had a virtual baby shower and she was referencing. I was like, oh, that is why not as many clients scheduled on Monday. So I had a half day yesterday of client calls, checked in on Basecamp. My husband and I had a nice walk, enjoyed the park here, and just had a kind of mellow day and enjoyed that very much. But I definitely did not remember until Sunday that it was a holiday on Monday. I'm just wondering if anyone else does that in our space as well. I'm sure it's pretty common when we make our own schedule. I was also traveling the week before, so to me that was my holiday time. That being said, happy Memorial Day. Obviously a very huge thank you to those who have served and are serving. That always feels important to acknowledge on a day like that, but I did not realize until Sunday. So that is what's going on in my world, and today I'm excited to be here and have a conversation with you. I think this will be an interesting one. This is a conversation I've wanted to have for a little while. I think it's one of those conversations that I'll be interested to see if you're interested in, if you're as interested as I am, but I think it's really valuable for you. We're going to talk about the most important client no one talks about, and just break this out a little bit. So we talk so much about booking clients in business, as of course that makes sense. If you're a service-based business owner, if you're selling one-to-one or one-to-many groups, masterminds, whatever that is, you're selling to clients. So of course the clients you sell to and your clients are such an important part of your business, and there's so much that comes up around clients. We talk about right fit clients, we talk about clients who aren't a fit, we talk about no-show clients. Gosh, behind the scenes I'm supporting my clients all the time with things like people who no-show or ghost, or for if they're going to enroll someone for a renewing client in a long-term client relationship, or if they're going to upsell someone to another program or downsell someone. I mean, I think there's so many different types of clients and client relationships, and I think those relationships are such an important part of business, and especially if you're in business and you want to be in business for the long term, those relationships are important, and so is the ability to market, to sell, to create clients. So of course all of that is important, and I think we talk about that all the time. I think there's a lot of that of course we should, but I think what we don't talk so much about is what I'm calling the most important client, which is you as a client in the client role. And I think we forget that as business owners, if we want to book great clients, there's also something to being a great client yourself, and not just from this like manifesting woo, like attracts like, though I think there is something to that. I think it's tough if you're not a great client to then even know how to cultivate great client relationships on the other side. But I think there's a lot as well we don't even think about as business owners in terms of being a great client and how that affects you as not only booking clients, but how that affects your experience in business, and how much as business owners, all of us tend to be clients in some form, in some way, shape, or form. So you might not be investing in a coach, for example, but you might have a team member you're investing in. You might invest and be a client with a photographer, with an accountant, with a social media manager, with an OBM, with a VA, with a coach, with a strategist, with a therapist, there's so many different ways in which we are clients. And what I have just seen to be true over 7 years in business is how when we know how to be a great client, that serves us obviously individually, but that serves that relationship and the results you get from those investments you make. So we're going to talk about that a whole lot today. This is not a conversation to create a set of rules or to suddenly get you in your head, or to shame anyone or shame any situation, or to, for some reason, put out the message that you should be a great client and the service provider has no responsibility, because I think there's that messaging that sometimes right now is going on in our space a little bit. I think that is gross. That is not what I'm here for. I think as service providers, we absolutely have a responsibility. We're going to talk about that. But I do want to talk about that client service provider relationship a little bit more, and to just talk about that a bit more. The reason I'm sharing this too is I just renewed with my coach. So I have been a client of hers now for 5 years. So I'm renewing for my 5.5 year. Or going into my 5.5 year. All of my team members have been on my team for at least a year. So I've been a client of theirs for at least a year, many of them for multiple, for 2.5, 3 years. And I also look outside my business. Even my colorist, I've been a client of for a long time. I have long-term relationships not only with my clients, but also as a client. And I think that's not a coincidence. And I just have seen, I just have learned so much on the client side that served me on the service provider side. Last year alone, as a client, between my coach and my team, I think we invested a little over $100,000. So this is coming from that lens and experience. And again, I think this is just a conversation that's really worth having that serves you both, because I know I hear this from clients all the time, that question of like, am I doing this right? Is this how everybody else shows up in containers? And to normal some of those experiences, but also to help you get the most from those investments and those relationships. So let me just pull my bullets and my notes here. There's 4 main buckets I want to dive into today, and obviously if you have questions for me, throw them at me. This is for you than more for me. So definitely now we're on the replay. If you have questions, I love to hear those from you. So first point we're going to dig into is why striving to be a good client usually isn't all that great for anyone. I think this is a trap a lot of people fall into, why this is a little backwards, where we get some of those lessons from, and really how you can drop into what really does serve you to become that soulmate client everyone is looking for, right? You and I are looking for soulmate dream clients. This is how to be one of those soulmate dream clients. I'm going to share from the coach perspective inside all of the things you might think make you an air quotes bad client, and really how that's just not a thing at all, and the very, very, very short list of things that actually are a big deal in my perspective and experience from the service provider side that would have me, question a client relationship or maybe want to let a client go. We're going to talk about some of my biggest takeaways after investing and being a client with the same coach for over 5 years, and similarly what I've learned in being a client to my incredible team for years, and just investing at this 6-figure mark in being a client essentially. And then I'm just going to share a little bit about, just to wrap this all up, from both the client and coach side, what goes into being the kind of client who gets results and gets the most from your investment, because I think that's something we're always concerned about. And of course, I'm going to keep saying this is not to take responsibility off of the service provider or the program you're investing in by any stroke of the imagination, but I do think there's something on the client side when we learn how to be a great client and really learn how to be show up for our investments in a certain way that I've just seen really serve, again, from the level of investing I've done, really serve those investments and the ROI I'm getting on the other side that we just don't always talk a lot about. And I think that can just be a valuable, helpful thing for you when you're looking to make that next investment, whether that's in a coach or in a team member or in something like an accountant or a course or a program. I also don't know, you'll have to let me know. My camera, I feel like it was all focused and now I feel like it's a little fuzzy here. So my apologies if I feel like it's not the screen. I think it's something with the way the focus goes. So apologies if I'm a little fuzzy, but hopefully the vocals will come through just fine. So let's talk first and foremost about the idea of being a good client and where I see this really trip up a lot of my clients. And gosh, I've fallen into this myself, and just some of what I've had to unwind in the relationship I have with the people I invest through who are supporting me. And I think just where this comes from and how I think what we can unwind here to really be a great client and really serve that relationship. So I think what happens a lot from those of you who have been given the good girl, good boy teachings and mentality, or who have a lot of lessons maybe picked up from grade school in terms of what it means to be a good student. I almost think it's that good student mentality. I see a lot of this get carried over into the client service provider relationship. I know for sure my first 6 months with my coach, I definitely was in good student mode. And again, this isn't like you're doing something wrong if you're in good student mode, but what I find is when we're wrapped up in that mindset where it's to be a good client means to be a good student, and to show, it's showing up to school and being a good student. It's all about not getting in trouble, right? It's very rules following, very how do I not get in trouble? How do I take up as little space as possible? And what I really see then with this is we tend to get a little bit almost performative is the right word. It's proving or just trying to be all buttoned up and not very needy, I think, in the container. And I think that if you've had that kind of upbringing, or if you've been to a school that's maybe taught that, I think there can just be a lot of messaging around, don't need too much, don't want too much. The way you're going to be a good client, the way you're going to be a good person is don't take up too much space, don't ask for too much, don't be too needy. If you're too needy, that's a wrong, bad thing. And what I want to offer as a perspective is I really don't think that that is what I personally, and this is my perspective, you can try it on for size, you don't have to, but I really don't see that as being a great client. I think of this a little bit as the example if for any of you who ever have hired someone to clean your home or your apartment or wherever you live, I think the same mentality of like the way we're going to be great for the cleaning person is not to be too needy. And what I've seen a lot of people do, my mom used to do this, is kind of clean the whole house, do like a perfunctory clean before the cleaning person came over. And so that, you can be liked and so that you're likable and so that you're a good client in air quotes. And really all that does is sort of minimize or like remove the reason and need for an investment. And what I've really had reflected to me by both my coach and by team members is when you're doing that, you're really not allowing someone to do their job that they want to do. And most people want to feel really good for how they're earning their money. And you're kind of removing that away or that opportunity from someone by behaving that way. And it's really not actually in the best service for not only what would make you a great client, but really for that relationship and getting the best results and outcome for the container, even the benefit for why you're investing in the first place. And I think using that same example, it's very different to say, hey, you've got a cleaning person coming and you're going to pick up and put away the things of yours that aren't within the job scope of the person cleaning your home so that the surfaces are clean so they can really do their job. I think that is being a great client. That's similar to my coaching clients. I give them a welcome packet and I let them know, some of the ways they can best utilize our support together. And one of the things I reflect to them is, if they come prepared to a session, if they fill out their questionnaire before our call, if they come prepared with what they want to dig into, or if they don't know what they want to dig into, because sometimes I think the best coaching sessions honestly happen when sometimes clients don't know what they want to dig into, but really open to trust the process. And I find that to be kind of what we're talking about here, where it's like, sure, put your things away, right? Understand what's right to bring to a container, what's not right to bring to a container. I think that understanding that is a really great way to be a great client. So knowing what is appropriate for what's within someone's job scope and not, and bringing that and maybe cleaning up, so to say, the things that aren't within someone's job description and not bringing or asking them to do those things or not making someone's job harder than it needs to be, I think is a way to be a great client. But that sort of good student mentality where it's like you're just trying to be good and not have any challenges or problems or like, look, I don't even really need your services. My house is perfectly clean. That really, I think, can hinder the client service provider relationship so much. I did a live stream with one of my clients and good friends, Tilly Yarrington, on Instagram. We had an Instagram industry chat. And we were talking about this really briefly, but just how, as most service providers, again, really do want to support you. And so this mentality, I think it can seem like it's the nicest thing to do, but I really think it can just hinder being a great client and building that great relationship and allowing someone to be in their role, right? Your role here is to be the client. Your service provider's role is to be in that role and to allow for that. Let me know if that makes sense there. I think the other thing here, kind of with that same mentality that I see really can hinder being a great client in that relationship, and something that, again, I've had to work on for sure. I think it can be very humbling to be a client and to invest in support. I think oftentimes, everyone here is a business owner, right? We're CEOs. Most of us have a little bit of control freak tendencies. I shouldn't say control freaks, but some of us can be a little controlling, and I think that can serve us in so many ways. Many of us are driven. Many of us are high functioning, high achieving. Many of us are really good at figuring things out. That's why we have businesses. That's why we're great entrepreneurs. That's why we're great at what we do, right? And those are all beautiful qualities. And those can be the same qualities that sometimes can make it a little more challenging in the client role to be able to really show up for that relationship and to receive support in a way that's going to best support you. Because I think what I see both on the client side and the service provider side is when we show up sort of feeling like we don't need anything, or like we have all the answers, or like maybe we know best, and we just really allow our ego to get in the way, that I think can really hinder the client service provider relationship and your ability to get the most from the investment you're making. And I think this is something that it does require a little bit of dropping the ego about being humble. In terms of humble, just in terms of realizing we don't know everything. And no matter how great you are at what you do, there's just always going to be blind spots for all of us we can't see. And I think being able to receive support in a way where we're both willing to stay in our power and not give that away and just like expect someone to have all the answers and all the secrets, but also be willing to say, hey, this is something I don't know, or this is something I could use support with, or this is something I'm struggling with, I think that is frankly really challenging. And I think many people think the best way I can be a great client is like pretend I don't have a lot of problems, pretend everything is okay, to minimize things, to be like, oh, this isn't a big deal, or to like kind of come in knowing all the answers already, or to like think that any of that is being really needy. And what I want to offer is I really think it's the opposite. Again, I think it's very different to come into a container, whether that's with your OBM or your VAs or your coach or your accountant or your photographer, right? Whoever you're hiring, and giving all of your power away and expecting them to know all the answers and expecting them to get your result and expecting them to know the secrets or to like just do everything for you. I think that is not the healthiest relationship. And again, that as a CEO just means we're giving our power away, but that is very, very different from then having the pendulum swing to thinking you're supposed to know everything. You're not supposed to be that needy. Gosh, I'm glad I have not encountered this at all. And I don't think any of my clients have, but I just know through the mastermind I'm in and just hearing what's going on in our industry that there are apparently tons of containers, right? Where people, coaches, service providers are really making it seem like the way you're a great client is to not be too needy and to not use your sessions and to not use too much within the container and to essentially come in already knowing things. And to me, that it just actually seems so backwards, because then why are you investing in something in the first place, right? I invest in support because I both feels good to be supported, but also I can't do everything and know everything on my own. And I think being that humble, I think that is a marker of wisdom and being a CEO, to both be in your power and know what you're an expert at and to know what you do know, but also to be wise enough and confident enough and grounded enough to know you can't do everything on your own and that you can't possibly know everything, and that there are other people who are experts and who can, again, simply see the things you can't see. I always use this example, but I always say I can't see the spinach in my own teeth, or I don't want to put mascara on in the dark, right? I just can't see things for myself that someone else looking at me can see. And I think we forget that with support, no matter how brilliant you are and how many decades of experience you have. I think that is just the beauty of having support. And similarly, no matter how much of a superhero you are in terms of what you can execute on, most of us need some support and a second set of hands at a certain stage of business. And so I think, again, just having that, I don't know if humble is quite the right word, but that I think there's a confidence in that, a confidence in knowing what you do know and being in your power, but also being confident enough to know that it is okay to not know everything and to get support in that same way, I think is really what makes for being a great client. And what I think I've always been a good client for many reasons, but I think what's made me an even better client for both my team and my coach is really leaning into this more and more. I do think at the start of my business, I felt a little bit more like I had to hold everything and I had to sort of know everything and I had to come in like really almost like prepared to the degree that was detrimental for, say, a coaching session, because I thought that was my responsibility. And I think some of this also comes with having long-term relationships with the people you're investing in. There's more trust built there. But I do think surrendering a little bit of that control while still showing up in your power and not giving that away or expecting someone to babysit you and caretake you, I think is really a way to be a great client and also to get the most from your investments and out of the support you have. Let me know if that makes sense. I'm so curious to hear what everyone's experience is with this, and curious to hear, and if you're watching on the replay now, let me know this as well. But everyone here is, most of you, I find it hard to think that anyone here won't be a client ever. So most of you have been a client at some point or are now in some container, but you're also serving clients. So I'd be curious just to hear from either perspective. But if you think about this through the lens of the clients you have, to think about what it's like for you when clients show up in these different ways. And I think that can be so helpful as well, to think about what makes for a great client, both for yourself in terms of how you want to show up and on the other side. So be very, very curious to hear about that. I'm drinking cold brew again, y'all. And this is both dangerous and delightful. I think it is the tastiest thing when it's warm out, but there is a very, very good chance that in about 10 minutes, I will be speaking a mile a minute or off on 14 tangents. So if that happens, just so you know, I'm totally blaming the cold brew for it. So you're welcome is maybe the thing I want to say there. Okay, let's talk about the next. Did I have anything else I wanted to say on that part there? The other piece, this is the other piece here, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think just remembering here that just noticing where that mentality of that being needy means that you're bad or doing something wrong, I think that is really the programming, the messaging that we've picked up from elsewhere. And I think that's just a great thing to unpack with maybe a coach or to do journaling around, to even see where did you learn that messaging, where were you taught that being needy is a bad thing, that is wrong, that is, not safe maybe. I think there can be quite a lot there that we're not necessarily going to be able to dig into a live stream, but I think that's where it can be challenging sometimes to show up as a client and to get the most from your investments. And then similarly, why it might feel challenging to hold clients who are, in air quotes, needier, if that has been messaging or what you've had experiences around. And I think there's a very, very, very big difference again between having needs and asking to have your needs met and taking up space within a container that you're in to ask for what you need versus giving away your power and not taking personal responsibility or not showing up for your investment and sort of just asking someone to do everything for you where that isn't part of what the agreement is. Very, very, very big difference there. But I would just invite you, because I think that's where some of this like good client in air quotes, good girl, good boy, doing things right, like where that mentality can sometimes come from. And I would just invite you to check in with that if that's ringing true for you, because I think it's an opportunity, because this does show up in so many places. And the more you're able to unwind that, and what I just see is the more I'm able to show up and allow myself to be supported in my business and in my investments, the easier it is to also attract clients, again, who are able to do the same, but also the easier it is to grow and scale your business for so many reasons. But it's tough to do anything on your own. And for those of you who believe in the woo side of things, right, it's tough to allow for the support of something outside of ourselves energetically if we're just like trying to hold on to everything and we think that not doing everything ourselves or knowing everything ourselves or being needy is wrong or bad, right? It's just tough to surrender to any of the magic to come in. And kind of how we do one thing is not necessarily how we do all things, but it definitely is how we do many things. And so this can be an interesting thing to take a look at that might be showing up in how you're showing up as a client, that might be showing up elsewhere for you also. Okay. Let's see. What did I want to say here next? Okay. So the next bullet I wanted to dig into. Let me just see if there were any questions. Okay. Don't have any questions. Y'all are quiet. But if you do have a question, throw them at me. So the next bullet I wanted to dig into here is really from the service provider side, from the coach side, what I have seen through my clients and what I know I've thought would make you a bad client in air quote, that just really and sincerely are not a thing at all, are not a thing. And then the very short list of things that are actually a big deal in my perspective and experience. And I hope this is helpful for you both to release some of the pressure I see people put on themselves, especially when you're making a large investment. I think it's such a shame when you're making such a large investment to then put so much pressure on how you're supposed to show up instead of allowing yourself to show up the way you really want to and need to in terms of being supported. And I hope, I've been doing this for over 7 years. I've been coaching for 8 years. I've been in business for 7. So I've been charging for my coaching for 7 years. I have a lot of experience from the service provider side in terms of what would and would not bother me. And also, again, I've been a client, I've been coached for that whole time. I've been with the same coach for 5 years, going on 5.5 years, but I worked with another coach before then. So I just have a lot of perspective from both sides. And I really think there's a handful of things that I would really see in my experience would that I would say, this is not okay for me and a client, and that I would consider a reason to possibly end a client coach or client service provider relationship. And so hopefully that'll be helpful to hear. And hopefully this will also be helpful for you to hear on the service provider side in terms of maybe what's coming up for you with clients, where maybe certain things where it's like if you're wondering, oh my gosh, am I doing something wrong that this is happening? Or should I be more frustrated or mad at this? Obviously, I can't tell you how to feel. I can't tell you what your experience is. Everyone here is going to have slightly different experience. I'm giving a little bit of generalizations here, but hopefully that can give some permission there, but then also maybe help you see some of the areas that, like, hey, this is actually something maybe it makes sense to have a boundary around. So I think, well, I don't think, I know, because I've both thought this, and I have had so many clients feel that they must be my worst client ever because they are having a hard time, because they're bringing something really challenging to a call, because we've had a really sticky, hard coaching conversation that, like, wasn't all affirmations and positive things, because they've gone through a hard season, because maybe they're not getting results as quickly as they want. For those of you who don't know, I only offer one-on-one, and the way I charge for my coaching is with a base rate and then a revenue share. So I only make more money if my clients are making more money. So I think sometimes that can put pressure, clients can put pressure on themselves, definitely not for me, but on themselves, in terms of like, they must be a bad client if they're not making me lots of money. And I say that because I pay my coach the same way. She also has a revenue share model, Lacey Sites. I did not come up with that innovation at all, though I love it from both the client and coach side. And I know when I started working with her, I both thought, gosh, like, oh my gosh, I must be the worst client ever, because I'm bringing my stuff and I've got so much stuff. I've shared pretty transparently here, worked through in therapy and in coaching quite a bit of trauma, and I had, because of that trauma, had just a lot of ripple out mindset, just a lot of mindset stuff that was coming up for me in business. And I definitely remember thinking, like, I must be the worst client. She must hate working with me. I thought that with therapists before. I have thought that, with so many different service providers, and then particularly with revenue share. Definitely shared this before, that my business makes multi 6 figures now. We make reoccurring multi 5 figure cash months, around 30K to 40K a month. Great, but that is not where I started, right? My first 6 months with my current coach, I maybe booked one client, right? I don't think it was until the end of my first year working with her, I started making 5K months, and then I very quickly jumped to 10K, and then right after that to 24K, and kind of up from there. But I was definitely a slower build, and so I definitely had stuff worrying where I was like, I must be a bad client, I'm struggling with things, I must be super needy, I'm using all of this support, like that. So I get it, I hear you if that is something that comes up for you. And what I can really and sincerely say from the coach side, that has actually really helped me to see why it's not a big deal and to believe my coach when she tells me like it's not a big deal at all, is on my side, I see that as my job. I am never, ever, ever, ever bothered by that. Outside, of course, I don't want clients to go through a hard time, but even, I'm trying to think of how to say this in a way that doesn't sound fucked up, because I don't want my clients to go through a hard time. But sometimes I think when a client is going through a hard time, or when I'm going through a hard time, it's sort of like the best thing that could possibly happen, because it is the situation that brings to the surface the very things we need to look at and address to get the things we want, right? And so if it's always like unicorns and rainbows, sometimes that is a situation in which, not that there always has to be a challenge or problem we dig to the bottom of the barrel of, and I'm here for there not to be things. We don't always have to find something. However, sometimes especially when we're stuck and not getting the results we want, I find some of the most powerful shifts happen because some stuff has come to the surface that we need to wade through and we need to move through. And not that I get excited for that, because that's going to sound really screwed up, and I again want to be so mindful. I'm not like excited for people to have a hard time at all, but I also see that as my job, and I know if we can move through some of that, and that's the stuff that's keeping someone stuck, right? And we can move through that. Like, there's so much goodness on the other side of that. And so I reflect that here to say, not only is that not a thing that makes someone a bad client, to me, I think if someone's willing to bring that and be vulnerable and open and coachable and like work with me through that and be willing to maybe have a sticky coaching call or a couple sticky coaching calls or a couple of calls where they're like, ugh, I'm so mad at Kim because she pushed me really hard. I think that makes for the best clients, right? And the best client relationships, and also just for the best work. And so I reflect that here because I've been on the other side of it, and I just hear it from clients so much where they're like, oh, you must just hate that we always talk about the same thing, or that I'm bringing this again, or that I'm going through this time. And it's literally quite the opposite. Again, I don't want anyone to be struggling. I don't love that for clients, but I just so applaud my clients for being brave and willing, and I'm so grateful that they trust me to bring that to the table. And I see that as my job, and that's what I'm good at supporting them with. So sort of what we were talking about earlier with what I've heard from my team, where it's sort of like, if I just take on a bunch of stuff because I don't want to be too needy for my team, I'm taking away work from my team. If I clean my whole house before a cleaning person comes, right, I'm taking away their job. Kind of the same thing here. So that's one of those things that I think people think really makes them a, in air quotes, like, bad client. And it could not be further from the truth. I think your willingness to be open, to be vulnerable, to ask for what you need to be supported in the way that is appropriate for the container, obviously. What clients bring to me is probably not the same thing they're going to bring to their OBM or to their virtual assistant or to their accountant or to their photographer or even to their therapist, right? I have to hold a very clean boundary around what is coaching and what is therapy. But within those bounds, being willing to be vulnerable and ask for support and to bring your stuff and to let someone in, I think makes for the best clients ever, and is also how you're going to get the best results. And I think that's also an edge that has just helped me to become an even better client for not just for with my coach. And I think that's one of the reasons I get great results from my investment is I am willing to be vulnerable and to be transparent and be like, here's my stuff that's coming up. But also with my team, there's lots of vulnerable things in my business that I feel like just wanted to hold on to. And I think part of what makes me a great client is being willing to share that with my team, and also being willing to be transparent, say, this is a hard thing for me to let go of control with. I think we sometimes think that we're supposed to do everything, and like, it's not supposed to feel challenging or hard. And I've just seen it to be so the opposite, and just the more willing you are to just be human and to communicate that, the, in air quotes, better client you're going to be, but also the better relationship and experience and results you're going to get on the other side, the more you really help your coach or your team or your therapist or whoever that is really to be able to support you. So none of that bothers me at all. I'm rolling down the hill here. I'm not on a hill, but I'm rolling a little bit. So let me put myself back there. So hopefully that will be helpful for someone to hear. And honestly, I would at this stage really offer that, like, really notice where that, if that is coming up for you and you think that's wrong or bad, again, where does that come from? Why is that? Were you taught that, or did that come from another container? And I would also just be mindful of how much you adopt and believe that any of that is wrong or bad, because what I always want to think about too is how I'm a client is also going to translate in terms of like what I expect and how I show up for my clients. So if I'm thinking that it's wrong or bad to be vulnerable and ask for support, to bring my stuff to the appropriate containers, of course, right? I'm not going to bring what I bring my therapist to my virtual assistant. That would be so inappropriate, right? So within the appropriate spaces. But if I think that's wrong or bad, then of course that's also going to affect how I am as a service provider and what I think is wrong or bad for my clients to bring to me. So I think that's why this is really multi-layered in terms of, or multifaceted in terms of why it's important for us to take a look at and why it's important for us to think about being a great client. I would also just really be mindful of where you're investing your dollars. And, you know, if there are containers that are making you feel wrong or bad for bringing what's appropriate to have support around, and again, what's appropriate for the container, what's appropriate for a coaching container, even what's within coaching, what's appropriate for a one-on-one coaching container is going to look different than what's appropriate for a group coaching or a mastermind or for a course or for a Voxer only forum, or again, for therapy or from coaching or from a coaching call to tech support, right? I think being mindful of those boundaries is very important on both service provider and client side. But within that, just notice, and I would just be mindful of any program or offering that is making it wrong for you to lean in for what you need and to be, in air quotes, messy or having a hard time, given that most of what we're investing in is to support us with the messiness or to get support around that in some way, shape, or form. This is maybe a more neutral example, but I think about with my accountant, right? It would be wild if I thought I was supposed to have figured out and done all of my taxes for my business, and that would make me a bad client if I didn't know something about my taxes or if I had a question around that, right? Like that doesn't even logically make sense. Like, why would I be investing in that support if that were the case? So I would just keep coming back to to this, and just what I can reflect to you is it is so not a thing for me on the service provider side, and I would be very mindful of investing anywhere where someone does make that a thing. Again, within appropriate bounds. I'm not going to go to my accountant to talk about my trauma, for example. Not appropriate. What is, and this was the other thing I wanted to speak to here. I think there is also a difference between having or being in air quotes bad client versus a misfit client. I'll share the very few things I would consider make for an in air quotes bad client, or just a client that I would want to let go. I don't really love the term bad because that just seems so wrong, but that just isn't gonna, that I would not want to serve. But and just what you can think about on the, show up the way you want people to show up in your container. But I think there's a very big difference between that and someone who's a misfit client or who's not the right fit. And I think that's important to really speak to, because the truth is, no matter how much you screen, I think I do a great job between my content and my funnels and free calls and consultation calls to screen for and to bring in qualified leads who are a great fit and to have great fit clients. I have a roster that I'm so blessed that I love that are all really great fit clients. And over 7 years, of course, there have been clients who have come through who end up not to be the best fit. I think that is just a very normal thing that happens in business. And, the longer you're in business and the more you have things to screen for that and know how to message and to market and to qualify for leads, the less that's going to happen. But that will happen from time to time. But I think really seeing that a misfit client is just that, right? It's just not the best fit. It's sort of like when you're dating, no matter how many qualifying processes you have in place, it's possible you're going to go on a date with someone who's just not a fit for you to date. That doesn't mean they're a bad person. That doesn't mean they're not dateable. That doesn't mean you're not dateable. All that means is that there's just not chemistry and there's not a fit there, right? And you're just probably not going to date anymore. And maybe you shouldn't have gone on the first date in the first place, but like, hey, the screening didn't work so well. That's very different than going on a bad date with someone who's disrespectful or really just kind of a horrible human, or who's treating you really crappy. You're not respecting your boundaries, right? Those are very, very different things. And so yes, the goal in business is to screen for and to have qualified leads and to bring in those right fit clients. That is what I'm all about. I think that having a roster full of right fit clients is how you make what Ken Honda calls happy money. It makes business so much easier and so much more easeful and joyful. And a misfit client is not a bad client. They're just not a fit. And I think really holding that is important so that you're not making a misfit client wrong or yourself wrong in that process. Whereas there are, I think, a handful of things that I would say make for, again, I don't love the term bad, but just for a lack of a better way of saying, a client who kind of like a bad date, someone where you're like, I would not want to go on another date with you, not because you're not a fit, but because you're just not the kind of human I want to have a date with. Similar in terms of client. Few things that come up for me there are someone who doesn't respect your boundaries. To me, if someone doesn't respect boundaries and doesn't respect container boundaries when you're setting and holding them clearly, that to me, maybe we could just call that a misfit, but I would say that that's just a no for me in terms of a client. Someone who doesn't honor an agreement and doesn't honor the agreement in terms of showing up when they say they will, who's repeatedly not honoring your time, session time, whatever that is you offer, who's not honoring your agreement in terms of invoicing and paying, who's maybe ghosting you on agreements or paying, or who's just forgetting that there's a human on the other side. Those to me, I would also even say maybe someone who's not communicating their needs and feedback, but I don't think that's a bad client. I think that's more someone who can learn how to lean into receiving more within the container. But those for me would all be things, like the very few things where I would say this isn't okay for me and I would want to let a client go, which again is very different than a misfit client, which just simply means, hey, we didn't have chemistry here, or my process, my approach is different than your process, your approach, or what you need. And we can just say, sort of like dating, right? We can just say this isn't a fit, not you're a bad, horrible person. So hopefully that is helpful to hear, and hopefully hearing that you can be like, oh, well, that makes sense. Those are pretty common, like pretty reasonable things that wouldn't be great to have in a client, wouldn't be the way I'd want to show up in a client as a client, but also maybe things to check in for yourself, right? Like something I think about as a client is I want to be a good client so that I know how to hold space for and attract great clients. So that also means I want to honor my service provider's boundaries. And I think I'm really good at honoring those. I want to communicate really clearly and not ghost my service providers, even if there's, something sticky that comes up. I want to pay their invoices on time. I always have, right? I want to honor the agreements we make, right? I think that makes for being a great client, and just holding that standard for myself also makes it then much easier to hold that standard with my clients. So I think thinking about it that way. And again, all of this is to say, and within this, I can still have a sticky situation as a client or on the other perspective. So if I think as a client, I've had to communicate with team members, for example, about things I'm not happy about. I don't think that makes me a bad client. I don't think that makes them a bad service provider. I think that's a relationship and a working relationship. And I think that's both being a good client and being a great service provider is allowing the spaciousness for that and seeing that doesn't mean I'm a misfit, they're a misfit. That doesn't mean anyone's wrong or bad. It simply means this is a relationship and we're two humans trying to work together. And I think that's what makes, honestly, for a great relationship. I think about my marriage, right? I have a beautiful marriage. We've been together almost 9 years this fall. And that doesn't mean we never have a disagreement. But part of what makes for a beautiful marriage and a beautiful relationship is we communicate, right? I'm a good wife, in air quotes. He's a good husband, in air quotes. I really hate that labeling, but just for the sake of this conversation, because we're both willing to have that communication and to trust, and because we've built enough trust in the relationship to allow for that. It's not like, oh, because one of us is upset or because one of us wants to communicate something, now everything has gone to crap. So I think just thinking about that with as a client yourself, but also on the service provider side, I think can be really helpful. And I think this is also how not only you can be a great client and get more from your investments, but I think this also allows you to have those longer term relationships with your service providers on the client side. And, conversely, for you as the service provider as well, but we're talking about being a client today. One of the things I think that really serves me is I do have really long term relationships, and I thrive in those with both my clients, right, but also as a client myself. And I think one of the best ways to get the best ROI from your investments is striving for, of course, this doesn't happen all the time, not everyone you ever work with you're going to have a long relationship with, and they're going to be people who are a misfit, or maybe that really, it's a season where they're not able to show up for the boundaries of the agreement. But those long-term relationships, and being a client that is looking for those long-term relationships and is willing to show up in a way that builds those long-term relationships, which means communicating when there's a challenge or a problem or a need, or being okay to be vulnerable, all the things we're talking about here that allow for those longer term relationships, is, I think, one of the ways to get the best ROI from your investments. Again, I invested just around $100,000 last year between my coach and my team, and I think I get a great ROI. But part of that is because of all of the things we're talking about, and because the longer you work with someone, the longer you're a client who's showing up this way. And every time there's a challenge or you're unhappy, that you're not just like, peace out, or the second you're not getting results, or the second you're frustrated, the second you're vulnerable, or the second someone doesn't do something exactly the way you want to, that you're not just like, peace out, let me go find someone else. You're also helping build the kind of relationship that leads to results. I think about with my team, for example, it would be so expensive in my business if every time we had a mistake, I thought that meant that either I was a bad client and I needed to fire myself, or that was a bad team member, right? And I had to start all over and find someone new and train someone new, right? It would be so expensive for my business, and my business would never move forward. Similarly, if I think about with my coach, right, one of the reasons I think I just shared with y'all, right? My results didn't come really, well, I had a fuck ton of intangible results in the first 6 months. I should phrase that in a way that, because I think intangible results will get you tangible results. But if I was just sort of like, I am not a good enough client because I didn't get results in the first 6 months, or because, I don't know, my coach triggered me or said something that made me upset because she was pushing me hard, and I don't like that. And so instead of communicating that or working through that, I'm just going to find someone else who just always makes me feel good and find a new coach and support every 6 months or every year, I I don't think I'd have the results I do, because part of the reason I have the results is we keep building and strengthening that relationship so we can do better and better work and we can get better and better results. And the same with my team. So I think hopefully this is helpful to hear. I think that's also a part of what makes you a great client, but also have that great relationship to get the biggest ROI from your investments. Again, oh, I have comments. Why did I not see those? Stephanie says, hey, she says, I too hold a certain standard being a client. I so believe you do. I so believe that about you. And I'm sorry, I totally didn't. The way the Facebook thing is here, these were not popping up for me. So seeing them now. So throw questions at me if you want. And then I have one more thing I'm going to share with everyone before I hop off. But what was the last thought I was going to say here? Oh, what does feel really important to say here is I do not want anyone to hear this now is the opposite of where like now we're creating the good student syndrome, where it's like your job is just to put up with shit and just to work with the same person for as long as possible, and that is the goal, and that's what makes you a good client, that's what gets you great results. Please don't hear that, right? It's similar to dating. Of course, the longer you're in a relationship, the more you can grow together, the stronger you can be, the benefits you can get from that, right? My husband and I have a stronger relationship today than we did 9 years ago, because we've just been able to build our relationship and we're just that much stronger of a team and a unit for it. However, I was in a decade-long relationship before that there were some things happening. We don't need to unpack that here, but there were boundary crosses and value crosses. And it's not like, well, to be a good client, to be good in a relationship, I need to stay in something as long as humanly possible because that's where the benefits are. So then I'm going to put up with boundary crosses, value crosses, things that are not okay with me. That's not what we're talking about here at all. So of course, whether you're on the client side or service provider side, if there are boundary crosses, if there are value crosses, if there are misalignments, right, where it's just not a fit, right, it is okay to move on. I don't want to create the narrative where it's like you should just always find someone, stick with them no matter what. No one should be held to a certain standard. Only you on the client side should be held to a certain standard. I think that's quite a harmful narrative. It's more when we strive for this and when we see these opportunities and when we come from the mindset of this, I think as a client, where we're looking at this as a partnership and looking at these as long-term relationships and looking at things as not just how do I be perfect, how do they be perfect, and there's no room for anything else, but more what's my role in this relationship. My role is to be vulnerable, to show up, to bring my stuff, to bring my challenges. Their role is to support me and serve me, but also within that, I get to give feedback. I get to speak up when there's something that doesn't feel good or when maybe there's a mistake made with my team and address that without then just deciding we're going to throw everything away. I think that is how you can both be a great client and service provider and have those relationships that, again, if they're the right fit and boundaries and all of that are being respected, can really serve you in business and long term really, really serve you to catapult results, because the stronger that relationship is and foundation is, right? Just think about coaching, right? The more vulnerable, the more you can bring, the more you can, quantum leap always sounds like a funny term, but it really is true. The more you can quantum leap, and the same with your team, the more well-oiled things become, so the more fun things you can play with on the back end of your business. Hopefully that makes sense, because I wanted to share one last thing before we hop off, because the other thing I want to share is just some of my biggest takeaways, and we might need to have a second live stream if this is interesting to y'all, but some of my biggest takeaways after investing in support with the same coach for over 5 years, going on 5.5 years, investing $100,000 last year into my business and myself between coaching and team. What I've learned as being a client to my team members, many, again, who I've worked with for over a year, 2.5 years, some of them, maybe 3 years even. And then just really and just the way I frame this for clients in terms of how you can show up as a client to get the best results. But similarly, if this is useful from the service provider side, how you can show up as a service provider to help your clients get the best results. So I shared this on a podcast. I don't think we did a live stream around this, but we shared this on a podcast. So I'll be brief around this. And if I can think of the podcast episode, I will link it, but I can't off the top of my head think it. All right. I'm just going to down a little more of that cold brew that's so tasty. But one of the concepts that I've come up with that I borrowed from the acting world that I have brought to business that has just served me so well, again, as a client and as a service provider, is really thinking about how you pay your agent as an actor. And what I learned acting, and what my acting teacher used to teach us, he used to tell us, he's like, y'all are so funny as actors, right? He's like, you just only want to pay your agent 10%, but you just want to give all of your power away. He probably didn't use that terminology, but you expect your agent to do everything for you, right? They're supposed to find you the work. Somehow they're supposed to show up and book you the work. And so it's sort of like you love your agent if you're booking work, but if you're not, it's all their fault. But you forget that you only pay your agent 10%. And really, that means they've got 10% of the pie and responsibility. 90% of it's really up to you as the actor in the business you're running and treating your acting business like a business and how you're showing up to audition. 90% of it's really on you. And that concept really clicked for me. And I think it's such a way to think about how to not give your power away, how to stay in your power, but also how to both stay in your power and ask for and receive support. And I think about this from both the service provider side and client side. And that is what has served me so well as both a client and a service provider. And this is what I have my clients, some of my clients, I'll literally have them map this out, is to really get clear on the 10%, 90% split and as a client, what the 90% of the relationship of results you are responsible to show up 100% for, and what is the 10% the service provider is 100% responsible to show up for. Conversely, you can think about this from the service provider side. I think as a coach, what is the 10% of my client's business that I am 100% responsible to show up for? For example, I'm 100% responsible to show up for their investment. I'm 100% responsible to show up for those calls, right? There are certain things I'm 100% responsible for, but that is 10% of their business and their results. And what is the 90% of their business, of their results that they're responsible for showing up 100% for? And so I think that can just be, again, just a helpful way to think about it. And the reason I do the 10%, 90% split is in acting, you really do pay your agent 10%. So any money you make, if you have an agent, if you have a manager, sometimes it's 15%, but you pay your agent 10% of what you make. That's with revenue share. My clients pay me 10%. I pay my coach 10%, along with the base rate of what they make. When I worked in advertising, and I represented directors commercially. So when a director would book a job, they would pay us about 10%. They paid us that split. And I think it's just a helpful way that percentage, I think really is a helpful way to represent what that responsibility is. But that doesn't mean it's just 10% responsibility or 90% responsibility. How I see it is, what is that 10%? What is that 90% that each person is 100% responsible to show up for? Because I think as a client, and what I've just seen as a client with my coach, for example, for now going into our 5.5 year, I think what really serves me in that relationship and what makes me a great client, what helps me to get the biggest return on my investment is I do not give my power away, right? I stay in my power. I don't expect her to have the secrets or the answers or to figure my business out or to get me results in my business or to get me clients, right? I think that's like how weird and I'm not codependent, but like that's just so not her job or her role. I really am clear on what is the 90% Kim as the CEO of this business is responsible for and responsible to show up 100% for, just like I'm very clear in the coaching relationship. What's the 90% I'm responsible to bring to the table, right? I have to let her know what I need support on. I need to let her know what's going on in my head. I need to let her know where I'm stuck. She can't help me if I'm not letting her know. I need to lean into support between session. I need to show up to a call prepared, open, coachable, present, right? There's a lot even within that coaching relationship that I am responsible for, 100% responsible for. And if I don't show up for that, it doesn't matter how brilliant or amazing she is, she can't support me. But what I like about this is that also leaves 10%. And that 10% is really important, and not 10% for someone to show up 10% for, 10% for the service provider, for my coach, for example, to show up 100% for. And I think leaving that, like that's where it's also like, yes, have personal responsibility. Don't give your power away, and allow yourself to be supported. Allow yourself to lean in for support. Allow yourself to receive support, right? There is a 10% of my results that I couldn't do on my own, right? Like I couldn't get on my own. I need someone to show up 100%. Whether it's my coach, I need my team to show 100% for their 10% role in my business. And that it's not to say that they aren't more valuable than that, but just in terms of, I think about my OBM, her job is to show up 100% for her 10%. It's still my job to have the vision for the business, to create the content, to show up and serve my clients, but it's her job to show up 100% for her 10%. And when I can see it that way, I think it also makes it then a lot easier to both show up in your power with your responsibility, but to also hold the service provider or your client, depending on what role you're in at the time, to their percentage and to show up 100% for that. And I think that is a way then as a client, you can be a great client showing up that way, right? My clients are so great because they show up with so much responsibility. They stay in their power. I don't want my clients' power. I don't want to be the boss in their business, but I also really appreciate that they do show up open to receive support and open for me to show up 100% for my 10%, because that's how I can best support them, right? We have to still allow for that room for someone else to come in and support us. So that's why I like thinking about it that way. I don't know if it'll land for everyone, but that really landed for me when I was acting, and it just lands for me very well in business. And I know for my clients, a lot of them, that really helps them both with our relationship but also with their clients. And again, the reason I like that is there's a responsibility on both sides, right? We both as a client and as a service provider, and you're playing both those roles. We want to be in our power. We want to be in our personal responsibility. But I think in our space recently, personal responsibility has been used inappropriately, where it's to say there's no responsibility either on the service provider side or on the client side, depending on who's having the conversation. And I think that's just not the way it works, right? There is a lot of responsibility on the client side. There's a lot of responsibility on the service provider side, and being really clear on what that responsibility is and how you can stay in your power and show up 100% for that is how I see you can both be a great client, be a great service provider, but also get the most out of any investment. Let me know if you have questions around that. I hope that part is helpful for me, that it helps my brain all day, every day. But I realize that might be a little confusing as a concept for some people, so feel free if there's anything I didn't explain very well there. The other couple things I've learned in terms of being a great client that have really supported me from not just getting a great ROI, but also really enjoying the investments I make is, I'm trying to think of, I guess there's a couple ways I want to say this. One, I really trust myself to show up for my investments, and I'm just trying to think of how I want to say this. So I really trust myself to show up and get the most from my investment, but I also trust myself to know what from an investment I actually need and what is okay to not utilize. So I'm trying to think of how to explain this. Okay, this is a good way to explain this. So with my coach, it's similar to how I support my clients. I have coaching sessions and I have Basecamp support, and what really supports me to get the most and to be a great client is I really trust myself to show up 100% for my investment. I trust my coach to show up 100% for my investment and her 10%, right? I'm going to show up for those calls prepared. I'm going to show up coachable. I'm going to show up open. I'm going to show up and use Basecamp when I need it. However, I also really trust myself to not feel like if I'm in a season where I don't need as much support, maybe to not feel like I have to check in to Basecamp every day, or that if I'm in a mastermind and we have workbook type things and they're super valuable, but if I'm in a season where I've got other priorities and focuses in my business, I don't feel like I'm wasting my investment if I'm not milking every resource and asset in there. And I just really trust myself to both show up fully for my investment and to get the most out of it, but to also know what I need from that investment at any given time, so that I'm also not over leveraging, because that's a weird way to say it, but that I'm just really clear on my priorities and that's okay. I many of you know, because I've been using this as an example so much, but I joined a gym across the street. It's a really beautiful high-end gym, and there's so many different amenities. I trust myself to show up for that investment, to show up and use it the way exactly I need and to get the most out of it. I'm going to go to a spin class tonight. I'm going to go work out regularly, right? That investment is easy for me to make because I know I'm going to show up and use it exactly the way I want and need, and to get the most out of it. And because of that, I'm going to get a great ROI. I also don't, have maybe a scarcity mindset around it, where I think that, oh my gosh, if I don't use every amenity every single day, I'm not getting the most out of this and I'm wasting my money. I don't think I've ever used the spa services there. There's a hot tub and a sauna and a steam room. I might at some point. I just tend to be someone who likes to get in, get my workout done, and get out. And that's fine. And there might be a season where I want to use that all of the time, and that's available to me. But I feel like that's a way I'm really able to trust myself with an investment and to get the most out of it, is really to trust that not only will I show up fully for and like ready and prepared and to get the most out of an investment, but to realize that that doesn't have to be a scarcity mindset where it's like, oh my gosh, I have to use everything or it's not worth it. Because I think that, again, can just be a lot more scarcity and honestly be really overwhelming in a way in which if I had to do that, I'd probably never go and work out because I would need like 3 hours every day instead of I can use it exactly the way I need to in the season I'm in. So that has really served me, and it's served me with my coach, and there have been seasons where I've needed more, I needed less, and just to make both okay. And what I find is just knowing the spa is there across the street if I want to use it and I need it, to me is really valuable. Similar to if I know that there's support between session, even if I don't use it for a week, for example, just knowing it's there feels really valuable to me. But I don't have the mindset that if I don't need it, that I'm wasting my investment, or that I'm a bad client or a good client, or that my coach is bad or good, right? It's more just really trusting myself to use it to allow myself to take up space in the way I need to, when I need to, but not to do so just because I feel like if I don't, I'm wasting something. It makes me think of if anyone's ever known someone who's like this, or ever had this mentality when you go out to order food, and if you, let's say you go to a really nice restaurant and you order something and you're like, well, just because I spent money on this, I should eat everything, even though maybe you're stuffed halfway through what you're eating. And I think when you have just a trust in the money you're spending and a trust with yourself and your investment, right? You're a client at a restaurant. I think both thinking, well, if I invest in a meal, I'm going to enjoy that meal fully, right? I'm going to trust myself to invest in what I want to get the most out of it. But also, there's more where that came from. That doesn't mean I have to gorge myself and that I have to eat everything on my plate, even if I'm stuffed. That doesn't mean I've wasted my investment. So I think that mentality, Stephanie says that was good. I think you meant I don't know which part you're talking about. I think you meant about the scarcity part there. So that has really served me, again, with team. And just to understand the difference here, this doesn't mean with team, for example, where I'm like, oh, we're just going to invest in team hours and not use them. Of course, we're very mindful of team hours and being efficient, but it also means I don't feel like I need to micromanage team hours or feel like, oh my gosh, if there's 1 month where maybe team hours were a little different for certain reasons that I need to get wrapped around that or feel scarce. It's just both. It's that mentality of I both trust myself to show up prepared to get what I need for an ROI, to show up for my 100% of my 90%, my team, my coach, my investments, to show up 100% for their 10%, but also not to come from a scarcity mindset to think that has to mean grab everything all at one time or it'll never be there later. And I really find with business, especially with coaching support, and I guess this would be probably with the gym too, probably with so many investments, but coaching support is the easiest because that's what I'm doing myself on the service provider. I find there's so many things that we can't. The food example is so good. We literally can't digest everything at one time. And what I've seen to be true, there's so many things that I'm so glad I knew about them and that was there. But that like the time for me to utilize that tool or to lean in to get support around that specific topic or idea came later in my business. And then it's just nice to know, oh, that spa is there. Oh, I now have room to digest that certain meal, like that certain tool, that certain lesson. It's so helpful to know that's there, and that it was almost like my brain was primed for it. But trying to do it all at once just gives you a stomach ache, right? If you go to the buffet and you eat all the things all at once, you just have a stomach ache. You do not enjoy the meal. Stephanie, you'll let me know if that's what you meant or if you have a question, but that was, I think that's what we were talking about. The other, I'm just seeing here, so I'm gonna be mindful of time. I'm gonna wrap us up in the next 5 minutes here, but I'm just seeing what other, because I made a whole bunch of points just in terms of, I've been a client for a long time, just things I've really learned about getting the most out of my investments. We spoke to this, so I'll just speak to this really quickly, but I think having the mindset of I don't invest in things to putting the pressure on this thing needs to get me results. I think about investments more in terms of I get me results and I invest in support to help me get results, either faster, better, easier, right? And so it's sort of like my clients. I don't get my clients' results. My clients are amazing. They are smart. They are talented. They are brilliant business owners. They get themselves results. I support them and I can help them get even better results. I love Rich Litvín's way of describing that coaching helps you arrive to a destination that you wouldn't get to by default, right? We're all on a default path in business, and coaching just helps you arrive to a different destination than you get to by default, right? And so I support my clients absolutely to get bigger results than maybe they would on their own without support, to see things they can't see, to speed up the process, to notice their gaps to close so that they can close the right gaps to get those results. I'm absolutely supporting them to get their results, but at the end of the day, they're running the business. They're doing the work. They have to show up for the coaching. They have to show up to do the mindset work. They have to show up to do the strategy, right? I'm not the one actually getting those results for them. I'm just supporting them to get bigger, better, faster results. And similar for me, right? My team is not responsible for my results. My team is not responsible for my business to make money. My team is not responsible for what they post in other Facebook groups being the thing that makes my business blow up. My coach is not responsible for that. She is responsible to show up for my investment, just like my team is responsible to show up for my investment. But it's really more co-creation and a collaboration, and something where it's like, no, my job is to show up for my part in this. My job is to know, right, to really show up for what the support is giving me to meet that halfway to get those results. And if anything, it's a collaboration, it's a partnership, it's a co-creation. But I think taking that where it's seeing like I couldn't do this on my own by any means, and I really take that. I really do believe that we thrive with support, and that I don't know any successful business owner who's not being supported in some way, who's making six figures or more. I just don't. And so I think support is invaluable and really what does allow you to get those big results. But I think just remembering that, I find helps my team, my coach, people to give me the best support as a client to get those best results, because then there's not that pressure. What I see both as a client and as a coach is when there's that pressure on, I'm just going to give all of my power away to my OBM, to my VA, to the photographer, to the accountant, to the coach, because they have to get me results. They need to save me. They know all the answers, right? That is, I think, just a very disempowering relationship. And I think that's just a great way to either always be stuck paying someone because they're going to be the boss of your life and your business, or just to make it a lot harder to get results, honestly, and harder to get the most out of a container. I'm just thinking, if I put that pressure on my team, right, that they had to get me results, that would be so challenging for us to do great work, as opposed to just seeing like, of course we want results. Of course this is a collaboration and a co-creation, and their support is part of what gets the business results, but it's not their responsibility to get the results. Similarly for my coach, of course I couldn't do this on my own. I'm making five-figure reoccurring months because of that support, or partially because of that support, of course. That is so true. But if I put that pressure on the coaching, where it's like, this coaching has to get me that, and it's like your job and your responsibility, we would never get these results, because there would be so much pressure on the container. And so I think that's just a way, that's been my mindset when I show up as a client, that's really served me, and really served me to ironically get the best results from my investments. I hope that makes sense. Again, I want to be so mindful of all of this, especially because of some of what's happening in our space. None of this is to say that there isn't responsibility on the service provider side. Of course there is. But I do think when we remove that pressure and we show up to be supported and to bring, again, to show up for our responsibility as a CEO, as a business owner, as a client, I think that's where we are able to co-create, have partnership, and get the best results. What else did I want to say here? And then this is the other thing I've really learned over the years with my coach and with my team, and I don't think I was great. I think I've always been a great client for many reasons, and especially because I pay on time, I respect boundaries, I think I'm communicative, I think I've always been a great client in that way. But this is the edge I think I've had to lean into that's made me, I think, a better client, and I think it's helped me to get even better results from my investment. And so what we were talking about earlier is really allowing myself to take up more space in my investment, of course within boundaries, and of course within what's appropriate for any container, like we were talking about. But I think it's being willing to be okay saying, I don't know this, or I need help with this. I messaged my coach something today and I was like, this is so stupid. I didn't say it this way, but it's something where I'm like, I could help my clients with this, but I'm just too close to it. And it was like a very simple thing in terms of something like how I'm setting up our social media posting grid on Instagram. But I was like, my brain had just like, for whatever reason, I'm too close to it. I just like can't see the forest for the trees. I'm just stuck on this. Such a simple, minor thing. But if I wasn't willing to take up space, or if I was like, oh my gosh, I should lean in, get support around, I think that makes me a great client because I'm letting like us have a great partnership to get those great results, like for all the reasons we talked about earlier. But I think really leaning into that and really leaning into the mentality of, I think about this in the mastermind. I love my mastermind. I love my mastermind sisters. But I think one of the things I've had to lean in to be a better client there is, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this, but just being okay, like taking up space and being okay, not knowing things or needing support or needing to ask something. I think I see this with clients sometimes, especially when they're newer to business. I think, and this doesn't mean they're a bad client, but just in terms of the opportunities we can all lean in to get more from our investments, just this feeling of needing to know all the answers in advance and like holding things closely or wanting to like, let me go figure this out on my own and then I'll go ask you for help afterwards. It's just, to me, it just slows down progress. And it also is like, well, why'd you hire me? If you're going to go figure that on your own, or if you don't want to ask for support, or if you know all the answers in advance, God bless you. Like, I'm not saying that you're wrong, but also why are you investing so much money in support? And so I think that's been something that has just been a little bit of an edge for me to lean into as someone who I am very self-sufficient. I'm an entrepreneur. I've got a little bit of the control thing there that comes up. I'm sure there's some ego stuff in there as well, but I think a lot of it is just, it's what makes me a great business owner and CEO as well. As I've just always been someone who's like, I'm driven. I can figure stuff out. You put something in front of me, like I will just tackle it and make it happen. I've been that way my whole life. It's what served me when I was acting. It's what served me when I was in advertising, when I moved to New York and started over. I broke into the advertising industry with no business being there, with no resume, with no connections, right? It's just a mentality that's really served me, but I think it's just been an edge as a client to see like, that's great, and you don't have to do it all alone. You don't have to wait until you figure it out, or to see if like you really can't figure it out before you ask support. Just ask for support up front. So I reflect that for everyone here, because I think that can be just a place where sometimes we get in our own way with the support we invest in, and a way to lean in and get just so much more from those investments, and to get the bigger ROI, but also just to close the frustration gap for yourself with things. So that's the last piece I wanted to share there. Was there anything else here? I think those were the main pieces I want to share there. Also, I've now been live for over an hour, so I'm gonna wrap us up, because I'm gonna go leverage my investment across the street and go to a spin class pretty soon, close out my client. So thank you for hanging with me. I hope this was valuable for you. I know this is a conversation we don't usually have, which is why I wanted to have it. You'll have to let me know if this was exciting for you. I think so often, again, we just think about the clients we're booking, but I hope thinking about how you can be a client and get the most from your investments and show up in those containers, as well as how that supports the way you show up for your clients and the types of clients you're attracting, and the way you're holding those boundaries and parameters and standards for your clients as well, can be really, really serving in those relationships we have in business. I think at the end of the day, that's what we're all doing here. If we want to be around for not just this week or next month, but year after year after year, I think we all just can be reminded that it's all about those relationships we're building. And these are just ways in and out of business we can strengthen those relationships and get the most out of them. So I hope this was valuable for you. And if you're listening to this and you're like, I would like to know more about what it would be like to be your client, Kim, and how I can show up to be a client for you. I'm glad you're thinking that. I would love to connect with you and support you. I have a coaching intensive still that we are opening up in June, an Unapologetic Words That Sells coaching intensive, which is a really great intensive where we can take a look at both your messaging and how you're attracting, on the other side, how you're attracting those right fit leads and qualifying leads, as well as your sales process for booking in those right fit clients, depending on what gap makes sense for you to close. And as a really fun bonus, if you want to practice being a great client, and if you want to see if we are a fit to work together, I am offering for a limited time exclusive 100K CEO mindset and strategy sessions. These are mini coaching sessions. They are free sessions because because of what's been going on in our industry, frankly. I want to put my money where my mouth is. I've been fully booked for 4.5 years. I'm blessed because of that. I generally don't offer free sessions anymore and usually only offer consultations, but at the start of the year, I opened these up and they've just been really great for me to get to know all of you more and to see what people need, but also just to have a little bit of that chemistry, coaching chemistry test to see if we really are a great fit to work together, because I want to work with clients who I know I'm a great fit for, who I can really show up 100% for my 10%. I know that you're going to show up 100% for your 90%. And especially since I do work with so many of my clients, not just for the intensive, but long-term, and most of my clients renew with me at least once, if not for years and years. I think this is a great way for me to put my money where my mouth is and to also support you. So if you're interested in seeing what it would be like to work together, if you're interested in that coaching intensive, I'll drop both a link for a discovery call and that free session. Please take me up on it. It's completely free. There are no strings attached. However, if you want to learn more about what it's like to work together, I will obviously share that with you on the call itself, and we can take a look at what's going on with your mindset and strategy and identify the right gap to close to move you forward so you can make those reoccurring months in your business, whether that's reoccurring 5-figure, 6-figure months, whatever it is that is next for you. All right, and then I will be back next week with, I was going to say another bite-sized biz lesson, but that's not what we're doing. We're on a live stream. I'll be back on Tuesday next week. I've got too much content going on. I don't know what day of the week it is anymore because of the holidays. I'll be back next Tuesday with another live stream for you, but we will be back with a bite-sized biz lesson and a You Asked, I Answered podcast episode on Thursday this week and a podcast on Monday next week. So all sorts of good content coming your way. Love you lots. Thank you for having this conversation with me, and I'll be back later. Bye.